The oppressive sun rose over the plantation, casting long shadows across the fields where the laborers toiled from dawn to dusk. The heat was already suffocating, but the real weight was carried by fear. For the children and women, each day was measured by their ability to survive the lash of cruelty and the harsh demands of those who considered them less than human. Amidst the rows of cotton and the worn wooden buildings, a girl of 14 moved with a strength and confidence that seemed impossible for her age. Her name was seldom spoken, often overlooked, but the men of the plantation had begun to notice her, and the whispers among the other children spoke of her courage and resilience. She rose before the sun, her small frame silhouetted against the early light as she tended to the animals and prepared the tools for the day's labor. Her arms, lean and strong, bore the marks of constant work, and her back carried the faint scars from the whips that the overseers wielded carelessly. Unlike the other children, who flinched at the sound of approaching men, she met every threat with steady determination. The overseers often underestimated her, seeing only her size and age, not the spirit that burned fiercely within. Even the adult men found themselves unsure of how to approach her, a girl who refused to bow, who refused to show fear. The day's labor began with the fields, the cotton ripe and heavy in the summer air. She moved with a precision and endurance that was remarkable, her small hands gathering and carrying bales heavier than many men could manage. Each step was careful, deliberate, and yet swift, as if she had memorized every inch of the field. The overseer barked orders, but her eyes remained focused, her posture unyielding. A group of men noticed her strength and sought to assert dominance, shoving her roughly to test her. She did not flinch. Instead, she shifted her weight, absorbing the push with a balance and poise that left them momentarily stunned. The other children watched from the sidelines, hearts pounding, mouths silent, fearful to draw attention but unable to look away from her display of defiance. By midday, the oppressive sun had baked the soil into a hard crust, yet she continued tirelessly. She carried water, tended to livestock, and organized fallen tools, performing each task with remarkable efficiency. Even those who were older and stronger struggled to match her pace. Her small size was deceptive. Her endurance and willpower were unmatched. The whispers grew louder among the children, who dared only to speak in hushed tones, admiring her courage while fearing the wrath of the overseers. They spoke of her strength in awe, of her refusal to bend, to cry, or to show weakness even when struck. The men grew frustrated, attempting to humiliate her by assigning impossible tasks. They forced her to lift heavier loads, expecting to see her fail. She accepted the challenge with quiet confidence, adjusting her grip and stance, her muscles coiled like springs ready to resist the weight. When they shoved her with their full force, she did not yield. Her eyes met theirs, unblinking and unwavering, and the laughter that had accompanied their cruelty faltered into uneasy glances. She was no ordinary child. She was a force that the men had not anticipated, and their failure to intimidate her planted a seed of uncertainty in their minds. Throughout the afternoon, she moved across the plantation like a shadow of quiet defiance. The older slaves took note, whispering to each other about her bravery and the uncanny strength she displayed. They shared stories of how she lifted objects too heavy for many adults, how she had never cried under punishment, and how her gaze could silence even the most arrogant overseer. For the girl, these were moments of survival and subtle resistance. Every action, every step, was a statement that she would not be broken, that she would endure whatever cruelty was thrown her way. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and red, she found a rare moment of stillness. Leaning against a fence post, her breathing heavy, she allowed herself a fleeting sense of satisfaction. She had survived the day's toil, defied the men who sought to diminish her, and proven her strength to those who had doubted. The shadows lengthened around her, and she knew that night would bring new challenges, more dangers and opportunities for both fear and courage. She felt the weight of her scars, the burn of her muscles, and the ache in her bones, yet her spirit remained unbroken. The other children watched her from a distance, drawn to her strength yet fearful of the consequences of approaching. They whispered stories of her defiance, tales that would be passed down in secret, quietly building her legend among those who knew the truth of the plantation's brutality. She was small, yes, and young, yet every action she took was a challenge to the system designed to keep them all in submission. She had become a figure of silent rebellion, a symbol that courage could exist even in the smallest and youngest of those oppressed. As twilight approached, the wind carried the distant sounds of the main house and the overseer's calls across the fields. The girl's senses remained alert, her mind calculating, predicting, and preparing. She moved carefully toward the barn, aware that eyes were watching, that the men would not let her defiance go unchallenged. The tension was palpable, the anticipation of confrontation thick in the air. And yet, in this moment, she felt a surge of strength and clarity, a certainty that no matter what was to come, she could face it. She had survived this long, had resisted every attempt to break her spirit, and she would not falter now. Every movement was deliberate, every glance calculated. She observed the shadows, noticed the shifts in the men's stance, and prepared herself mentally for the trials that night would bring. The plantation seemed to hold its breath, aware of the growing tension, as if the very land recognized the courage and defiance of this small girl, standing alone against the weight of oppression. She did not speak, did not cry out, but her presence alone sent ripples of uncertainty through the adults who thought they held all the power. Her strength was more than physical. It was spirit, intelligence, and the unwavering will to endure. As darkness slowly consumed the plantation, she continued to move, tending to small tasks, gathering supplies, and positioning herself strategically. The torchlight flickered, casting shadows across her determined features, highlighting the scars of labor and abuse and the fire in her eyes. She was aware that the men would soon attempt to assert their dominance, that the night would test her in ways the day had not. Yet she welcomed the challenge, knowing that preparation, focus, and resilience would allow her to survive and perhaps even triumph in the face of cruelty that had long reigned unchallenged. The evening air grew cooler, carrying the scent of dust and sweat mixed with the faint smell of the livestock and the earth. She paused for a moment, gathering her strength and composure, reflecting on the day's successes and the lessons learned from each encounter. Every shove, very harsh word. Every glance of doubt from the men had strengthened her resolve. She had learned to anticipate, to react with precision, and to maintain a calm exterior even when her body ached. Each scar and bruise told a story of survival, and each moment of defiance further cemented her status as someone the overseers could not easily control. As the final light of the sun disappeared and the first stars appeared in the sky, she positioned herself near the edge of the fields, eyes scanning the surroundings. She knew that nightfall would bring new dangers, and she welcomed them with courage. Her small frame, tired yet steady, carried the weight of her experiences and the determination to continue resisting. In that quiet moment, she felt a connection to something larger than herself, a sense that her courage, strength, and unyielding will were part of a force that no whip, no shove, and no intimidation could ever truly extinguish. Night had descended over the plantation, bringing with it an oppressive stillness that was almost suffocating. The fields, once alive with the noise of labor and the sun's heat, were now bathed in shadow, the silhouettes of the cotton plants swaying gently in the cold wind. The torches flickered along the pathways, casting wavering light that created long, threatening shadows across the uneven ground. In the silence of this darkness, the girl moved cautiously, her every step measured and deliberate. She had survived the day's toil, resisted men's attempts to dominate her, and now faced a different kind of challenge, one that lurked in the dark, quiet corners of the plantation where fear was supposed to reign unchecked. Her eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light, scanning for any movement. She could sense the presence of the adult men before she could see them clearly. Their approach was deliberate, calculated, a tactic meant to intimidate and assert dominance. Yet, she was ready. The lessons of the day had taught her to anticipate, to observe, and to react with precision. Her small hands gripped the wooden staff she had carried since the afternoon, and every muscle in her body coiled in readiness. She had learned that courage was not just about facing the world unflinchingly, it was also about preparation, strategy, and timing. The first man approached cautiously, attempting to block her path. He expected her to shrink, to falter under his size and force, but she did neither. She shifted her weight with a sudden, precise motion, dodging his grasp and sending him stumbling into the soft earth. A gasp escaped his lips as he realized that the child before him was no ordinary opponent. The others stopped in their tracks, watching, their confidence beginning to waver. The audacity of her defiance, The strength of her body and the fire in her eyes had begun to unsettle them. They had believed that fear was inherent to youth, that submission was instinctive. They were wrong. The shadows seemed to grow longer as men circled her, their shapes looming and threatening. She moved with the agility of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating danger, using her small size as an advantage to slip past their defenses. Every step was precise. Every movement was calculated to maintain balance and control. When a man lunged from the side, she pivoted gracefully, allowing his own momentum to work against him, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The sound of his fall echoed across the empty fields, and a tense silence followed. Her breathing was steady, her heart racing, yet her mind remained clear. The other men exchanged nervous glances. Some tried to intimidate her with words, shouting threats and insults, yet the girl remained unflinching. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, seemed to see past their posturing into the weaknesses and uncertainties they had never expected her to detect. She moved closer to the barn, using its shadowed corners for cover, always aware of every footstep, every rustle of leaves, and every flicker of torchlight. Her body ached from the day's labor, yet adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses and granting her a momentary surge of strength that belied her youth. A sudden shove came from behind, a desperate attempt to overpower her. She twisted with swift precision, using her assailant's own weight to fling him sideways, and he landed heavily in the dust. The others hesitated, their confidence faltering as they realized that they could not easily predict or control her movements. The girl's courage and cunning had shifted the balance. The plantation, usually a place of predictable fear, had become an arena in which she dictated the terms of engagement. Each attempt to intimidate her only strengthened her resolve. The night air was sharp with cold, carrying the scents of the earth, dust, and distant livestock. Her muscles burned, but she pressed on, moving with a deliberate grace through the uneven terrain. She ducked beneath swinging branches and leapt over loose boards, using the landscape to her advantage. She knew she could not defeat them all in direct combat, but she could outsmart them, exploit the gaps in their coordination, and maintain her freedom of movement. With each dodge, each pivot, each calculated maneuver, she reinforced a lesson that the men would not forget. Strength, courage, and intelligence were not limited by size or age. One man attempted to grab her from the side, but she spun with fluid motion, delivering a precise kick that sent him stumbling backward into the shadows. She did not linger to witness the result. Her focus remained on the next potential threat. The torches flickered violently in the wind, casting dramatic highlights on her face and the tense lines of her muscles. Her eyes gleamed with determination, reflecting the fire of someone who had endured far more than any child should. The men hesitated, sensing the growing power of her defiance, unsure how to proceed against someone who seemed to anticipate every move. The plantation itself seemed to respond to the tension. The cotton plants swayed as if in apprehension. The old wooden buildings loomed like silent witnesses, and the moon broke through clouds to cast an ethereal glow across the field. In that light, the girl appeared almost larger than life, a symbol of courage in the face of cruelty. Small in stature but monumental in spirit, she had learned to use her environment strategically, understanding that survival was as much about cunning as it was about strength. Every shadow, every corner, every rustle of leaves could be an ally or a threat, and she navigated them all with precision. A man charged from the right, but she feinted, leading him into a misstep that caused him to crash into the fence. Another attempted to block her path, only to find himself off balance, grasping at the air as she slipped past him. The others hesitated, fear and respect mingling in their expressions. She was no longer merely defending herself, she was commanding the moment. Each movement was deliberate, each decision calculated to maintain control, and each act of resistance reinforced the undeniable truth: she was not to be underestimated. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying with it the tension and anticipation of what might come next. The girl's breathing was steady despite the exertion, her focus unwavering. She had faced physical and emotional challenges throughout her life, yet the night demanded something more: agility, strategic thinking, and the courage to face overwhelming odds. She embodied all of these qualities, and in doing so, she transformed the landscape of fear into a stage for her resilience. As the night deepened, she found a brief moment to pause near the edge of the field, crouched low to the ground, scanning the surroundings. Her body was exhausted, yet every muscle remained alert, ready to respond. The men, now visibly unsettled, regrouped and approached more cautiously, their confidence replaced with uncertainty. The plantation that had long been a domain of predictable oppression had shifted, if only for the night, into a space where a single girl dictated the flow of events. She had turned fear into a tool, courage into a weapon, and survival into an art. She moved again, using the cover of darkness to her advantage, slipping between shadows and maintaining distance from the men who sought to dominate her. Each calculated step, each subtle movement, reinforced her control over the unfolding events. She was young, small, and often underestimated, yet the plantation itself seemed to acknowledge her presence, the intensity of her spirit, and the unyielding determination that had carried her through countless days of hardship. The night pressed on, full of threats and uncertainty, but she remained a force of defiance and resilience, prepared to face whatever was yet to come. The darkness of the night had settled over the plantation like a heavy shroud, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. The girl, 14 yet seemingly imbued with the strength of generations, had already faced challenges that would have broken many adults. Her body ached from the day's labor and the night's confrontation, every muscle screaming for rest, but her spirit remained unyielding. She had survived, defied, and resisted, but the night had more to test her. Every step she took was deliberate, every breath measured, as she navigated the fields, knowing that any misstep could bring a new wave of violence. The men who had tried to intimidate her earlier regrouped, their anger now tempered by a hint of fear. They whispered among themselves, unsure how to proceed against someone so small and yet so formidable. Their usual tactics of dominance and threat had failed, and the realization unsettled them more than any physical blow could have. The girl, sensing their hesitation, moved with careful precision, positioning herself near the barn where the shadows offered both cover and advantage. Her eyes scanned the surrounding darkness, catching every flicker of movement, every subtle shift in posture. She was no longer merely reacting, she was anticipating, controlling the flow of events with an intelligence and courage that far surpassed her years. A sudden movement caught her attention. One of the men had decided to rush her from behind. She spun just in time, delivering a swift, precise kick that sent him stumbling into the dirt. The sound echoed across the fields, mingling with the distant call of the overseer and the whispering wind through the cotton plants. Another man lunged, but she ducked low, pivoting with agility that left him off balance. The night became a blur of motion, her small frame weaving through the shadows with a fluidity born of both fear and experience. Every dodge, every strike, every calculated movement reinforced the growing realization among the men that this was no ordinary child. They were facing a force that could not be easily subdued. As the struggle continued, the other slaves watched from a safe distance, hearts pounding, awe mingled with fear. Some whispered encouragement, others held their breath, hoping silently for her safety. The girl had become a symbol of defiance, a living testament to courage in a world designed to crush it. Her actions inspired a quiet rebellion within the hearts of those who had long been resigned to suffering. Even in the midst of the chaos, her mind remained sharp, calculating each movement, predicting each attack, and using the environment to her advantage. Every fence post, every shadow, every uneven patch of ground became a tool, an ally in her struggle for survival and dominance over the fear that sought to contain her. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and the faint aroma of cotton. The torches flickered, casting dramatic highlights on the girl's determined face and the tense expressions of the men surrounding her. Her breathing was controlled, though each inhale and exhale was a reminder of the intensity of the struggle. The men, now visibly shaken, made a final attempt to corner her near the old well. Their voices, sharp and commanding, tried to intimidate, but their uncertainty betrayed them. The girl, sensing the opening, shifted her stance and used her momentum to push back, sending one man sprawling into the shadows. Another stumbled over the uneven ground, leaving the others momentarily frozen. In that critical moment, she realized that survival was no longer merely about evading blows. It was about turning the tide, asserting herself fully, and showing that courage and strength could triumph over brute force. She advanced with calculated steps, each movement precise, each glance unwavering. The men, caught between frustration, fear, and disbelief, hesitated, allowing her to regain control of the situation. Her small frame seemed to grow larger in the moonlight, every action radiating confidence, intelligence, and indomitable spirit. The struggle reached its climax near the barn, where the shadows were deepest and the torchlight most erratic. One man attempted a final lunge, but she sidestepped with the grace of a dancer, using his momentum to trip him over a loose board. The others froze, watching as their plan unraveled before their eyes. For the first time, the overseer's authority was openly challenged, and the plantation seemed to hold its breath. The girl's defiance was not just physical, it was a declaration that fear and cruelty would not dictate her existence. She had become more than a survivor. She was a force, a symbol, and a warning to those who underestimated the courage of the young and oppressed. In the aftermath of the confrontation, silence fell over the plantation. The men slowly withdrew, muttering threats that were tempered by the unmistakable knowledge of her strength. The other children and slaves cautiously emerged from the shadows, their eyes wide with awe and respect. They approached her with a mixture of reverence and gratitude, recognizing that she had not only survived but had asserted a power that no one had expected from someone so young. The girl, exhausted yet unbroken, allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to feel the weight of her achievements, and to acknowledge the courage that had carried her through the night. As dawn began to break, the first light of morning casting long shadows across the fields, the girl reflected on the events of the night she had faced, the worst that the plantation could throw at her, and she had endured. Her scars, her bruises, and her exhaustion were reminders of the brutality she had survived, yet they also stood as proof of her strength. The men who had attempted to dominate her had learned a harsh lesson. Courage, cunning, and resilience could not be contained, could not be intimidated, and could not be broken, even by those who wielded power over life and labor. The other children, inspired by her bravery, began to whisper her story in hushed tones, ensuring that her courage would not be forgotten. She had become a symbol of hope, a living reminder that defiance and resilience could flourish, even in the darkest of circumstances. The plantation, with its rows of cotton and its oppressive history, had been marked by her actions that night, and the memory of her defiance would linger, a quiet rebellion against cruelty and oppression. Though her body ached and her spirit was weary, she knew that the fight for survival was ongoing. Each day brought new challenges, new tests, and new threats, but she had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, strength of spirit and determination could triumph. The girl, small in stature yet monumental in courage, had faced the forces of fear and cruelty, and had emerged not just alive, but victorious. Her story would echo through the fields, through whispered tales, and in the courage of others who drew strength from her defiance. By mid-morning, the plantation seemed quieter, almost subdued. The men who had sought to intimidate her were reluctant to approach, their confidence shaken, their authority quietly questioned. The other slaves moved with a newfound sense of hope, inspired by the knowledge that someone had stood unflinching, someone had resisted, and someone had survived with courage intact. The girl, still young, still small, had shown that fear could be challenged, cruelty could be resisted, and survival could be achieved with intellect, bravery, and determination. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, she moved through the fields with a steady gait, her muscles still sore but her spirit vibrant. Each step was a reminder of what she had endured and what she had achieved. The plantation, with its long history of suffering, had witnessed an extraordinary event. A young girl had defied the odds, faced the cruelty of men much older and stronger than herself, and had emerged victorious. Her story, though just beginning, would leave a mark on everyone who witnessed it and everyone who would hear of in the days to come. In the quiet moments, when the sun cast long shadows across the fields and the wind carried the faint rustle of cotton leaves, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey she had undertaken. Every struggle, every shove, every threat, and every act of defiance had culminated in a moment of triumph that no one could take away. Her courage had become a beacon, illuminating the possibility that even the smallest, youngest, and most underestimated individuals could challenge the most powerful forces. She had survived the night, she had endured the cruelty of the day, and she had shown that true strength lay not only in muscle but in spirit, determination, and unwavering courage.